Um, I want to welcome everyone to another Spotlight. And we're real excited to have the program and to have all of you here. And I'm going to introduce Jan Schwartz, who put this program together. And we've got three wonderful speakers and a topic that I know everyone is interested in. So Jan, welcome.
Thanks, Beth. Tonight we are honored to have Adit Klein, Boston's Rabbi Sue Fendrick, and her talented son, Eliana Crucial, for a very inspiring conversation. Adit will be our moderator. She is CEO of Keshet, a national organization that mobilizes Jewish communities across the U.S. to ensure full equality for all LGBTQ Jews and our families. She is a national leader for social justice for more than 25 years of experience as in the nonprofit sector. Since 2001, she has led Keshet, an organization that began in 1996. She has built it from a local organization into a national one that has supported tens of thousands of rabbis, educators, and other Jewish community leaders to make LGBTQ equality an imperative communal value. She has also served as executive producer of Keshet's documentary film, Hineni, Coming Out in a Jewish High School. Adit is a magna cum laude graduate of Yale University and earned her master's in education with a focus on social justice and anti-oppression education from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She serves on a leadership team with the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable and the advisory board of the Safety, Respect, Equity Network. She was honored by the Jewish Women's Archive with a Women Who Dared Award, by Jewish Women International with a Woman to Watch Award, by Mayim Haim with a Nashim Award, and by the Forward as one of the Forward 50, a list of American Jews who have made enduring contributions to public life. In other words, she is incredible. And we are so excited to have her tonight. Equally impressive is Rabbi Sue Fendrick. She was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1995 and works as a freelance editor, writer, and spiritual director. She lives in Newton, Mass. With her husband, and they are about to become empty nesters. They have 5 children, ages 18 to 31, including Eliana and his twin brother, Matan. Eliana is a recent high school graduate who will be attending the University of Michigan in the fall to study theater, design, and production, as well as sociology and neuroscience. Despite his age, it will become clear to you that he is a leader who will accomplish great things. Currently, he is passionate about political organizing, activism, dance, theater, working with neurodivergent kids, and peers, just to name a few. Eliana came out at age 14. Together, he and his mom will share their family experience through many lenses, including how very important family and community support are. We are especially grateful that they are here to enhance our understanding at a time when anti-trans laws against children are surging across our country. These laws can only be stopped by passing the Equality Act of 2021 that will be on the floor of the Senate later this summer. With that, I give you Adit, Sue, and Eliana.
Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you to the entire NCJW Chicago chapter leadership. As I shared with you earlier, NCJW has been one of Keshet's most absolute longtime and most steadfast supporters and partners. I see us very much as working to advance our shared vision of Jewish communities standing up for justice, not despite our religious tradition, but really because of our values as Jews and our tradition as Jews. So it's wonderful to be here with you tonight. So I'll share a bit about Keshet and then provide some framing and then turn it over to Eliana and Sue. So in addition to the work that Keshet does in partnership with NCJW and other organizations to advance LGBTQ rights in the broader world through mobilizing Jewish communities to take action for LGBTQ rights, Keshet also works for LGBTQ equality within Jewish communities, working with synagogues, JCCs, summer camps, youth movements, other kinds of social service organizations, Jewish federations, really every kind of Jewish institution, to work with Jewish community leaders to give them the tools and the skills that they need to create community institutions that are places of LGBTQ equality and belonging. And then we also work directly with LGBTQ Jewish teens, giving them just a space for support, empowerment, leadership skills training, and really above all, just a space to be fully themselves and be able to breathe. So our focus today, as Jan said, is on the trans experience and trans rights. Hello, someone's waving at me. Thank you. So I guess you are Jan's husband. Nice to see you. So our focus today is on the trans experience and trans rights. As Jen said, while Keshet's national campaign focuses on the Equality Act because of the sweeping civil rights laws that that law will enact when hopefully it is at long last passed, we are monitoring with great concern the really unprecedented surge of anti-trans legislation. We currently see over 50 pending pieces of legislation in 40 states around the country. These are pieces of legislation that seek to prevent trans young people from accessing the medical care that they need, to prevent trans young people from playing sports with teams of their affirmed gender identity, and numerous other ways that these laws seek to limit, restrict, and really invalidate the basic dignity of trans lives. Now, we know, of course, that the most powerful tool that any of us have for advocacy work is people's own stories. We know from our work to advance marriage equality in the United States, for our Keshet, at Keshet, we know from our work to advance trans rights in Massachusetts, that it has been through telling our personal stories as LGBTQ people that we've been able to touch hearts and slowly change people's minds. So I'm so glad that we have with us tonight Rabbi Sue Fendrick and her son Eliana Kruskal. I have shared in community with Sue and Eliana for quite a few years now. Eliana spoke at a gala of Keshet's very eloquently a couple of years ago, but this is our first time actually doing some kind of public education together. So it's really a treat for me. So thank you again, Jan and the rest of NCJW Chicago for inviting us. And so I think I'll turn to you first, Eliana, and ask you, can you talk a bit about your experience coming out as trans? What was it like for you and your family in the Jewish community and other communities that you're a part of?
Yeah, so it's so great to be here with all of you. Thank you all for having me. Yeah, and just like, I guess I'll give sort of a little bit like disclaimer that I think is important before I sort of share the beginning of my story, and that is that I think that well, two things. One, that I am just sharing my own story, right? And I'm one trans person in the world, and there's so many trans people in the world, and I have known a lot of trans people, right? And I'm going to try and sprinkle in some diverse experiences, but I'm telling my story and I'm sharing my perspective, and it is not a universal perspective by any means. And sort of in that same vein, I think that oftentimes in when people speak about their experience to people that want to become better allies, they share their experience of having a really hard time in their life coming out, and that sort of aims to speak to like the idea that like we shouldn't do this because this is the impact it has, and those stories are super important and super powerful. But I have been super privileged to have what I would call an overall very affirming and supportive experience in my life, and I think this is sort of the flip side of that, right? Like this is what we should do. This is a possibility. This is how we can support people. And so I hope that while my life is like not what some might call a sob story, it can still help you guys learn some things. So yeah, I guess I'll just give a little summary of my experience coming out in the Jewish community and in my larger communities. So yeah, like Jan said, I came out when I was, I believe, 14 or 15. In the end of my freshman year of high school. and that summer between freshman and sophomore year was sort of like where I was really slowly coming out to more and more people, and kind of that was when I got my hair cut, and that was when I was, really beginning my transition. And that was just a social transition, right? So like there's different aspects of transition that some people can experience. So some people medically transition, right? So, which is, taking hormones or getting surgeries or anything like that. Some people just have a social transition, which can look like a lot of things. It can look like changing your name. It can look like changing your pronouns. It can look like wearing some different clothes. It can look like getting a haircut or growing out your hair, that kind of stuff. But obviously, gender expression is not equal to gender identity. So none of those things are required. They're just some things that people do. But for me, that meant the first thing I think I did was get my hair cut, and I got some new clothes, and that was that summer. And then, yeah, over that sophomore year was kind of my first going back to school and getting into back to all the activities that I do. So like in my dance studio and all that kind of stuff. And also um, my many Jewish communities in my life. So my synagogue and um, the place I study Talmud, and just all of my communities, and Keshet, of course. And it was a really interesting experience because I had and of course with my family also. And I had a lot of sort of different experiences, but I have been super, super lucky to have had so many people in my life that I knew that this A wouldn't be a problem with them, but B, it would be more than that. Like it wouldn't just be not a problem, it would be like an a purposely positive experience, and that is something that I am so grateful for, and I think has really shaped my experience. So like for example, I have been very lucky to study at what is called the Teen Beit Midrash, which is in Boston, and it's basically where teens go and study Talmud and Mishnah. And I had an incredible teacher there named Rabbi Becky Silverstein, who is very involved in Keshet himself. And but that's actually not how I know him. And so he is genderqueer and trans, and he's a rabbi, and he has been an incredible mentor to me in my life, and has taught me so much, and just been an incredible person to learn from and with and friend. Um, and that is just one of so many experiences that I've had. And of course, then there's my family, right? And my family, I'm not going to pretend that it's been like smooth sailing 24/7, right? But my family from the start, I knew that when I came out, I was not scared that it was going to be um, like harmful to me, that I was going to be in danger or anything like that. It was hard when I came out. Things were like awkward and confusing, and like emotions were all over the place, I think, with a lot of us. Um, but it was never a question of like, are they going to support me? Am I going to be safe? Am I going to be affirmed? Um, and am I going to be okay? Right. And that is such a privilege. And things have only gotten better over time, right? Like we've learned together, and we've been in community, and um, I have so many incredible friends and mentors and family members that have just, yeah. So I don't know. I hope that was a good little beginning to my story. So.
Ellie, before you mute, or can you please unmute? 'Cause I want to ask you. You said one thing that I'm not sure if everyone on the Zoom would understand. You said, well, of course, gender expression is not the same as gender identity. Could you just say a word about what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So gender expression and gender identity are two pieces to someone's just like who someone is, right? So gender expression is how you express yourself in the world, and that might be the way you dress, that might be the way you accessorize, that might be the way you speak, that might be the way um, you carry yourself, right? Those are just different ways we express ourselves, but those are not based on our gender identity. So you know, um, so this is true for both transgender people and for cisgender people. Cisgender people are people who identify as the same gender they were assigned at birth. So if you were born and the doctor said it's a girl and you identify as a woman, you're cisgender. Um, and so I'm transgender, just to get those terms out of the way. And yeah, so gender identity is who you are, right? Like it's it's just your sense of self in terms of gender, obviously. And gender expression is not dictated by your gender identity. So you can be a man and love painting your nails, or you can be non-binary and love wearing dresses, or you can be a woman and love wearing dresses, or all of the above, right? So I hope that clarifies.
No, that was a fabulous explanation, and we'll have. I hope at the end we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So, if anyone still has questions, we'll have time for them. So I want to say, Ellie, I both appreciate and and it really saddens me that you kind of and because I understand why you felt the need to provide that disclaimer about how your story is not a heartrending story. It's a story with a happy ending that was pretty happy most of the way through. And because I think we have become so accustomed to hearing these really devastating stories, because the truth is that somewhere between a third and slightly over half of trans young people do attempt suicide. And that is the other side that is not Eliana's experience. That is the other side of what happens when you don't have a supportive family, when you don't have a supportive community. So I wish stories like yours were more of the stories that we tell, and that this could be sort of like the normative trans teen experience. And hopefully tonight is one step towards getting there. So Sue, I'd love for you to share with people, what was it like for you when Ellie came out, and what's the whole process been like for you in your family, and if it's affected your experience of community, then in that sphere as well.
Mom, you're muted.
I want to say thank you. Just to acknowledge what Idit said. Not only is this the first time that the three of us are kind of in this mode together, but this is the first time that Eliana and I are. This is the first time that I am kind of telling my story, and that we're sort of doing this together. So this is a new experience for us as well. So I'll start by saying that I had the experience when Eliana came out to us of both being a very strong, lifelong LGBTQ ally, raising our kids in a very LGBTQ friendly home, and still having my world really rocked by my child coming out. We were genuinely surprised. There were things in Eliana's childhood that in retrospect made sense in the context of his being trans, but nothing that only made sense that way. In part, I think that's because we never had any assumptions about what it meant to be or to act like, or even to look like a girl or a boy, and had not heard from Eliana that sense of radical disconnect. As I imagine it, although these are not my experiences, I imagine that having your adult child come out when you'll be supporting their journey but not involved in managing it is a kind of different experience. I think it can change you a lot, but it's one that often you're at some distance from. And that having a child come out as a young child often is more of a gradual process of affirming your child all along the way as they become who they are and tell you who they are. Having Eliana come out to us as a teen meant that we would be very involved in responding to and making decisions with him along the way, and that it would be a shift, a change in direction, and also involve some interactions with medical decisions. So not a big deal. We have adult trans friends and teachers, including Rabbi Becky, of whom I'm a great fan. We have, several friends who had trans kids, but we did not, at the time that Eliana came out to us, have any friends with teens who were coming out, although it then later very quickly turned out that a very close friend with whom I've had many things in common over our lifetimes, her son had just come out to her, and that companionship was really was really lovely. I wasn't part of groups or anything like that, but that just felt like enough and really important. I also want to say that fortunately that my husband and I had really great communication around this, and we're virtually always on the same page and supportive of each other. So, Edith, Eliana alluded to, and Edith talked more about kind of horror stories. And I'm in a couple of Facebook groups with parents of trans kids. And believe me, there are plenty of stories out there, including of parents, whether they're in the same household or whether they're separated or divorced, of one person being really problematic and the whole family being torn up about this. And that was really the opposite in our case. And I feel very grateful for that. It was hard at times because Eliana didn't always want to talk with us about things. That's, some kids really want to. My good friend's child really did. Eliana didn't always want to. And so we were at times needing to support him on a journey that we understood more in the abstract than in the particulars, but we were always listening and paying attention, and having mental health professionals with part of the process help us hear things that we couldn't necessarily hear directly from Eliana. And also, and I'm not sure if this is what you were alluding to, Eliana, but I think part of it is just the passage of time, his own growth, going from 15 to 18 is like, there's a lot of change that happens in there too. I also want to say something, Ellie and I talked about the fact that this is really the first time that he was going to hear kind of my story. And in large part, that is because, parents have, as I've already, alluded to, lots of feelings about the process. And it's really our job to process that, whether there's, there was a quite a fair amount of celebration and happiness that Eliana was finding himself more. And we love that. And also feelings of loss, confusion, even some fears. And those are legitimate and common feelings, but not ones that you burden your child with. You process them elsewhere. One thing I just want to highlight for today's purpose is just how lucky we have been, not only to have the values that we had, but to live in a community, in a Jewish community in particular, in which we could count on quite a fair degree of acceptance and love and even knowledge. That's not to say that everything has been perfect, but it's been pretty damn good. And we know that. And knowing that Eliana's initial years of coming out would be in that context was just enormous for us. I guess the last thing I'll say for now is what was clear to us is that always listening and being committed to Eliana and what they were telling us about their reality, hearing from professionals for whom this was not their first or even their 100th rodeo, and being passionate advocates for Eliana as a trans person. Those three things would always be our North Stars. And I'll say more later about how those things changed over time.
Beautiful, Sue. I want to broadcast that from loudspeakers. So Ellie, you spoke some about kind of the impact of your family responding supportively, and I know that you also sought support outside of your family. Could you speak a bit about kind of where else you found support, and what advice you would offer, to parents, to community leaders, to people who want to create communities of belonging and affirmation for trans folks of all ages?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll start with sort of like where I found support and then move on to advice. But yeah, I think one thing that my mom sort of alluded to a little bit is like the privilege that we have not only to live in communities, or not only to exist in communities that were generally supportive, but also to exist in communities that have access and give us access to so many incredible resources. And so like, for example, we live in Boston, and Boston Children's Hospital has something called the GEMS Clinic, which is a youth gender clinic basically. And it hasn't even existed for that long, but I think it was one of the first in the country. Um, and the person who founded it or started it is actually a member of one of the conservative shuls very near our house, and so that's pretty cool. That he was very active or is very active in the Jewish community and created this incredible resource that has really changed the narrative and the, I don't know, just the story that like trans youth in the Boston area, um, and the lives that they get to live. So that's one piece. And um, another piece is definitely just sort of broader support of like friends and community, whether that's found in like specific, like explicitly LGBTQ spaces or just in spaces where I've been able to find um, community elsewhere. So like, you know, of course, the incredible, amazing people I've met at Keshet, who I could go on and list so many names like that have truly just incredible people. Whether that's at school, in theater, in Jewish learning, dance, all of those spaces, I've met incredible people that have supported me like through and through, and have been so open to learning and changing. And that sort of segues me into my next piece of what would I sort of give advice to parents and just community leaders that want to make accepting spaces. Well, I think the first thing you need to do, or not you need to do, the first thing that you might want to do um, is sort of this is a really tricky thing to do, but walk the fine line of listening to trans people and, you know, basing your like the way you're creating your community spaces off of what trans people are asking and wanting and saying, and not like requesting emotional labor from people that don't want to educate, because it is no one's responsibility to educate you for free, or at all. And right, like just going up to like the random trans person in your synagogue that like you happen to know because you want to make your space inclusive, and you just like sit down with them at Kiddush and you're like, so tell me, what is wrong with our shul, like how can we make it more inclusive? Like that is not the way to do it. That's not appropriate, and I do not recommend doing that, because they're just a person who wants to enjoy their life, right? And like they may be willing to do that with you, but I don't know, I think that speaks for itself. So that's one thing. But also definitely you don't want to just guess, right? Like you want to hear trans voices. So really take those into account and listen. Another thing I would say for parents and for parents especially and for family members, is like my mom alluded to, like seek out support, because the reality is that like while it's about your child, you are not going to be able to support your child adequately if you are feeling like unstable or really alarmed or like upsetting. And like for example, like I'm a camp counselor, right? Like, and at my job today, like me and my co's were like going crazy, and like at lunch we were like barely eating, and then we were like, no, like we cannot take care of these children like throughout the day if we're not going to like sit down and take a moment to eat and like drink some water. And it's the same thing, right? Like you're just like my mom said, you don't burden your kid with the processing, but you do need to find support, whether that's like a therapist, whether that is finding other parents of trans kids, whether that is joining online support groups, um, and or whether that's educating yourself. I think people often really just sit there and wait for others to educate them, and it is, if you want to be a better ally, right, like it's your responsibility to find ways to educate yourself without requesting labor from trans people that you like barely know, um, and or know really well. So the internet is an amazing resource. There are many amazing books and movies and documentaries and um, podcasts and all that. And I think that if more people took just a little time like throughout their life to just learn a little more and like come to things like this and all that, I think the world would overall be a lot more accepting of a place. And yeah, that's enough rambling from me for now, so I think we'll stop there.
I wouldn't call that rambling. Thank you so much. So Sue, you said before that, you know, as we moved on, you would speak a bit about how things have changed for you and your family over time. I'd love to hear some of that. And then the same question that I posed to Eliana, you know, and I imagine you and Eliana maybe significantly aligned, and you know, you have your own perspective as a parent to offer. to other parents? What would you advise parents? What would you advise community leaders?
So can I just ask, do you want me to kind of, because we talked about questions, do you want me to combine kind of the question of what we're looking for from the community, or will we have separate time?
That will be separate.
Okay.
A moment of transparent facilitation. Yes. That
Yes. Sorry to open the curtain and reveal that we actually talked about questions for a few minutes before. So I was, when we were tossing around like how to structure this, when Edith used the word milestones, that really spoke to me in terms of translating our experience. So I want to talk about a few of those. Big picture, I really wish I could go back in time and say to myself from 3 years, like, this is going to be okay. I knew in the abstract it was going to be okay, but I really needed to hear that like from a heart. I have said that to many other parents subsequently, like, know that if you're feeling like your world is rocked, there's going to come a time where you're going to look back with like affection and caring to the person that you are now. So that really describes, I think, a lot about what these last 3 years have been like.
Can I just interject really quickly and say that I feel the same way, and I think that's really interesting about like myself.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's
Yeah.
About the sort of, it gets better.
Yeah, just like going back and like looking at yourself from then and being like, you knew abstract in the abstract it would be okay, but like looking back at yourself who was like overwhelmed and scared and timid and be like, it's gonna be okay.
So just look at what we're learning by talking to
Sorry to interrupt.
mostly strangers. So I think there are 4 sort of things that I want to highlight as milestones and important aspects or moments. One is that how important it was, even though it was often really hard for Eliana to do this, how important it was to really hear about Eliana's dysphoria, about how he felt pre-surgery and how much surgery mattered to him, and that his being clear with us about how unhappy that aspect of his life was a real gift to us. It was, everybody has a different story. And, at one point I said to Eliana, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how unhappy you were. And he said, I generally, I was not unhappy. I was just unhappy about this aspect of things. And really taking that in helped me just get in my bones what was true in his bones. What it was that he would say when, for example, when I would make a pronoun mistake, he would say, "I'm not a girl," and not just telling me in the abstract, but letting me know that he was hurting, even though that can be really hard to do, was actually a kind of gift to me in really getting this. The second thing I would say is that the professionals that we, came in contact were across the board, very validating, helped me understand how someone who grew up in our house could not come out as trans until age 15. That was confusing for me. Like, why didn't we know this sooner? And I learned how many, kinds of trans coming out stories there are, and how many paces and moments there are even among kids. Some kids find that around puberty is where that disconnect becomes strongest. So talking with professionals who really knew what they were talking about and who also knew Eliana also were touchstones in kind of my feeling like, oh, okay, again, getting this in my bones. I also, there were 2 things that happened that I sort of in the moment had a kind of awareness of them. It's not always in life where you're aware of like, oh, something has shifted or something is shifting right now. And there were 2 ways in which that happened. One is just where it was so clear to me around Eliana's surgery, first got postponed because of COVID, and we had to reschedule. It was the whole balagan, a whole mess in making that happen. And when I like watching myself became aware of just how much I wanted this surgery for him, like that there was just no ambivalence whatsoever. And taking that in was another milestone and a kind of marker of the journey. And the last thing I want to say is another light bulb moment that probably, if I was going to share one light bulb moment, this is what I would share with other parents is, people sometimes talk about like, you thought your child was one gender, there's a process of mourning. And I kind of have wrestled with that a bit, because you don't want to mourn the process of your child becoming and recognizing who they are. And at the same time, there is a recognition of feelings of loss. But I had this experience of looking, Eliana mentioned that he has a twin brother who is cisgender. Again, meaning he was assigned male at birth and still identifies as a boy, as a young man. And I had this experience of looking at a picture of him as a much younger kid and having this sense of wistfulness about, the person that he was then, and, just missing that aspect of things. And I realized that the process of Eliana's transitioning was, among other things, a kind of subset of like, of course you have feelings about who your child was and you miss aspects of that. And I mean, I have the blessing of so loving who my children are. And so recognizing that I could have a feeling of wistfulness about younger Eliana that wasn't primarily, and maybe even not at all, about gender, because Eliana, of course, is still here, and our children grow and change in all sorts of ways that we don't expect, that we don't plan for, that we don't always immediately understand, because that's what it is to parent someone, from childhood into adulthood. And seeing it in the context of that helped me both kind of settle into some of those feelings of wistfulness, and also to realize that they had almost nothing to do with gender. And just to clarify, because when Eliana and his brother were little, at one point, one of them said to me, "You loved us more when we were little. You said we were cuter then." I just want to be really clear. It is, well, I feel very blessed. My children are amazing. And my wistfulness, I think, is just in the context of every parent's wistfulness. And it's really a joy to realize that some things are really different about the trans journey, and some things share a lot of qualities with other processes that we go through as a parent. And that was really a kind of another light bulb moment for me. I've spoken long enough. I'll stop.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sue. So now a question for each of you, which kind of takes us, will transition us from personal story to kind of really kind of leveraging personal story for political action. So as you look today at the Jewish community, and let's say Jewish communities outside of Boston, given what you have shared about your experience of Jewish communities on the whole in Boston. So as you look to Jewish communities nationally, and as you looked at the national landscape, where, as we've discussed, there are some extremely troubling things happening, what to you feels most urgent? You have before you members of a chapter of a political organization that engages in advocacy work. Where should they dedicate their time and attention? Where do you want to see people who identify as our allies, as LGBTQ people's allies and trans people's allies in particular? Where would you like to see them invest their efforts? Whoever wants to begin should dive in.
I can start.
Great.
Yeah, I think, not to take the oneness away, but I'll say a couple things. But of course, as Edith mentioned first, the Equality Act, Keshet is putting a lot of work and doing a lot of mobilizing of people to get that passed, which is pretty monumental, and definitely there's lots of work to be done there. And if you're interested, there's certainly information on the Keshet website. And but also more specifically, right, like we talked about at the beginning, the anti-trans bills. And there are a lot of petitions you can sign, legislators that you can call and email. And I will put some information in the chat, and I think that NCJW will send it out in a follow-up email as well. But I'm going to put a link to a website in a second that has a bunch of petitions and numbers to call and that kind of stuff. And I'm just going to take like 1 second to talk about, in case like anyone isn't super sure about what exactly these bills are and what impacts they really have. And I might also put a link to a video in the chat of this incredible trans girl speaking about what these bills mean to her, to legislators. But yeah, really just like, as Edith mentioned before, these the suicide rates and just general mental health statistics for trans youth are really horrifying. And a lot of that has to do with family support and friend support and community support, but it has to do with access to care that they need to feel like themselves. And I think those go hand in hand, right? Like, you can have the best family in the world, but if your state has laws that do not let you go on puberty blockers, which are completely like non-permanent effects, many cis children use puberty blockers as well and are incredibly not harmful, to say the least, and very, very has like millions of studies that show that the effects are overwhelmingly positive. Right? Like, it doesn't really matter if it matters, but your family support can't change the fact that you are denied care that you need, and vice versa, right? Of course, if you have access to care, but your family is not supportive, then you don't really have access to the care. All that is to say that do the work to get legislators to pass the Equality Act and to not pass these transphobic bills all around the country. And also support organizations that are doing the work. So please, I'm just going to plug Keshet like for the 15th time, because not only because Edith's here, because Edith's amazing and all of Keshet is amazing, and the work they do is truly life-changing for so many people. So donate to Keshet. And yeah, I'll put all the links I mentioned in the chat, and I'll pass it off to you, Mom.
Great. Well, shockingly, I'm going to heavily overlap, so I won't repeat. I'll just emphasize aspects of what you said. So there are 3 things that I think are huge. I can't say enough about, as impressive as Edith's bio is, I just need people to know what an unbelievable organization Keshet is, that the entire Jewish community benefits from so deeply. And I want to say in particular, the teen Shabbatons for LGBTQ plus teens they're just these amazing nuggets of community and support. And if you know any queer or trans teens, you should send them, and they'll be in wonderful hands. But supporting the work of Keshet, supporting the work of an organization called Eshel, directed by our friend Miriam Kabakov, that works with Orthodox families with LGBTQ kids. Just incredibly important to continuing to make our world better. I just need to emphasize the piece about legislation, but in particular, any legislation around about denying kids medical care. And I just think we all need to really take in the outrageousness of denying standard of care, medical care to trans or gender nonconforming children and teens. Imagine, for example, if somebody said, well, we don't really think that people should get treatment for cancer because cancer is a punishment from God or whatever. And I'm sorry to be trivialize this, but we need to take in how outrageous that is and fight against that kind of legislation in particular. And the third thing I want to say is sort of obvious, but maybe not obvious, which is just the process of becoming ourselves and continuing to make our communities trans friendly, trans welcoming, being careful about respecting people's pronouns, not setting up our organizations in a way that is always based on a gender binary while still respecting people who find meaning in those in gender binaries. And just generally, the more that we can make clear through our language, through our various namings, that we absolutely recognize that trans people are not just out there and welcome to come in and we will be nice to them, but that trans people are part of our families, are part of our communities, are part of our world. And that when we name who we are, it's very clear that we signal that we know and love the fact that trans people are part of our world and that we are affirming of that reality.
Amen, and thank you. Sue, are you up for answering the question that was in the chat?
I certainly am. And to answer that question, I'll have to make fun of myself a little bit. So I'm really going to make fun of myself, but that's just, I'll just do that. I, at one point, Eliana, sometimes when, as I think a lot of kids often have very meaningful conversations over text, and we will sometimes have our most meaningful conversations over text. So early on, I think that I said something to Eliana, you can remind me if I have this right, something like, because I'm a kind of, you can't tell, I'm a plus sized person. And at one point, I think as a child, Eliana had dismay that he might have large breasts growing up. And at one point, I think said, is this because, I'm sorry. I said, is this because I'm like fat and you don't want to look like me? Like I had some thought that maybe Eliana was rejecting who I was physically as a woman. And he was like, yeah, no, it's no, why would you even say that? And I say that, I mean, I'm laughing at myself. I hope you will take my little story tenderly as a way of saying that there were like pockets somehow where, as a parent, my guess is that every parent has had like a kind of little tiny moment where they're like, is there something that I did or modeled wrong? But that has not, I'm saying that that's really the exception that has proved the rule. I don't feel like in any way, what I feel like is what my therapist at the time said to me. And I was so happy that I also had a therapist who really got this. And she said, you must be experiencing, among all these other things, such joy that Eliana is becoming who they are. And I was so glad to have her name that, in a context that could be all about, finding the pathology, that she was able to see and call forth from me that sense of joy. So no, except for that one little moment where I was trying to figure this out very early on, no, we didn't have any feelings of, or even wishes that we, could have done something different, or fears that we didn't know.
Yeah, I love the naming of just Eliana's unfolding as, more of the gorgeous unfolding of who he is.
Right. Exactly.
And so Eliana, before I turn it back over to Jan, we have a couple more minutes to give you the last word.
Yeah, could I take the two questions that are in the chat and combine them?
You can.
Okay, perfect. So the questions are, can I identify a light bulb moment in my life of like existence and of like becoming my authentic self? I assume like this person means like realizing I was trans, basically. And the second part of the second question is, do I think or hope there will be a time in my life when I will stop identifying as trans and present as 100% male? So the first piece of that, can I identify a light bulb moment? Yes and no. Like I think, right, looking back, there was moments where I realized it and didn't realize it. Like I realized it, but I didn't realize what I was realizing, if that makes any sense. But honestly, and I don't even know if my mom knows this, and I definitely don't think Edie knows this, but um, it was at the first ever Keshet Shabbaton that I was talking to one of the amazing Keshet staff, Doves Weinblatt, and I was just like listening to. I don't even know if I was talking to them, but they were definitely like talking about something, and I was listening to them, and I was like that's kind of sounds like it might relate to me. And then I just did a lot of thinking, and it made sense. But yeah, that if I had to pinpoint a moment, that would be it. Um, and in terms of the second question of do I think or hope there will be a point that I stop identifying as trans, I think the question comes from a place of like a bit of misunderstanding of what the word trans means. And I don't mean to like embarrass anyone. I just want to like clear up. And right, so transgender, right? The definition of transgender is identifying as a gender that is different than the gender you were assigned at birth. And so, for someone who's a trans man, you can like you are trans and a man, right? Like be identifying as 100% male and identifying as trans are synonymous often. And there are certainly people in the world that don't care to disclose their trans identity and sort of what the term is passing, kind of like the idea of white passing, right? Like people that are far into their medical transition, if that's something they are interested in doing, and are perceived in the world as cisgender, and they don't disclose their trans identity, they don't talk about it, and that's totally a valid experience. For me personally, no, I don't really see myself ever wanting to do that. It's not that I go around telling everyone I meet, hi, I'm trans, like that's not it either, but like which there wouldn't be anything wrong with that if I wanted to do that, but that's not what I do. It's not like I'm surround my whole personality around that or tell everyone I meet. But I don't really have a problem sharing it with people, and I think it's an important part of my journey. And yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
I want to thank you, Eliana, and you, Sue, so much for sharing your stories, your voices, for speaking so candidly, for sharing things with one another in this space tonight for the first time. Eliana, you used the phrase emotional labor earlier, and I want to just recognize and respect, this is emotional labor. It takes energy to kind of take the stories of your life and translate them into terms that people can absorb and can understand in the context of issues that they're engaging with. So thank you for taking that energy tonight for NCJW, for Keshet, for the broader Jewish community and world. Thank you again so much to Jan, Beth, and everyone at NCJW, and I will turn it back over to you, Jan.
Well, and I'd like to thank you so much, Eliana and Sue, for sharing with your heart and your insight so much important information and so much experience. And Adit, for you moderating this so that we could get them, such an amazing information. It was a great program. My son and I were texting during, he said, this is just wonderful. And I said, well, I was so glad that you're on. I'm so glad that I'm on, and I'm learning from all of you. I would like to say, by illuminating your experience too, you have given us a way to go forward with even more passion to advocate for the Equality Act of 2021 that NCJW strongly supports. In fact, since 1990, NCJW has been advocating legislatively and in the courts to fight for the rights of LGBTQ individuals, often partnering with Keshet. This includes supporting marriage equality and end to employment discrimination and hate crime legislation that extended protections to those victimized because of their actual perceived gender, disability, gender identity, and sexual orientation. NCJW has also provided past training from Keshet through their Trans Inclusion Jewish Organization training program, and we hope to continue to do so. National has published its own Gender Diversity and Judaism NCJW guide. I might also add that in 2001, NCJW launched the benchmark program to ensure that only those individuals with a proven record to support fundamental human rights, including those of the LGBTQ community would be confirmed to the federal bench. We have been supporters along with Keshet and many other organizations in the ACLU amicus brief regarding the recent Fulton versus the City of Philadelphia case. The recent Supreme Court decision, though narrow, underlines that to create change, we have much more work left to do, starting with doing all that we can to advocate for the passage of the Equality Act 2021 in the Senate. If passed, as has been said, it will put an end to the anti-gay laws and especially the anti-trans laws that are currently surging throughout many states in this country. After tonight's program, for more than what Eliana has put out in the chat, which is great, we will also send out more reading materials and actions to take. This is really important, and this is why we did the program tonight. I can't thank you, Eliana, Sue, and Adit enough for coming and being with us this evening. It was amazing, but it also gave us the fire to continue to fight with you. And I am just so appreciative. Now I give you our spotlight leader, Beth, who will update you on our future salons.
And I want to thank all of you. This is totally amazing to make such a tough topic seem like, you know, I have blue eyes and you have green eyes. That's part of life, and making it so much more accepting and make it easier to talk to everyone. So this is absolutely stunning, and thank you so much again. Briefly, our next month's program is going to be the cost of segregation with Gabby Abulafia, who's a program assistant at the Commonwealth Fund. And August 23rd, we're going to be talking about police reform. Our program is called Serve and Protect, ? About ECPS. And in Chicago, this is the Empowering Communities for Public Safety. This is trying to work with the police department, get some important changes. Again, thank you all. I think we're coming out with such a positive attitude and feeling of such joy for all of you for sharing this with us. So thank you, thank you, thank you.